Hello, my name is Greg Weatherby. I'm the owner of the Saltwateredge Fly Fishing Company in Newport, Rhode Island, and I'm here with Bill Peabody today to show you some of the most outstanding saltwater fly patterns developed for this area. Some of our guides through the years have developed these patterns in order to get them through a tough day of fishing, and now it's time for you to learn how to time yourself. In the next hour we're going to show you, so sit back and enjoy it, and let Bill be your guide.
This is a fly that we call the modified clouser. It was designed for fishing for albacore, false albacore, and it's effective on bonita and striped bass. It incorporates the use of lead eyes for weight, and it's tied not so much as a clouser minnow is tied, but more of a crazy Charlie style. And it's designed for false albacore and is a good fly for the albacore, the little toonie, the bonita, and striped bass. It follows the clouser minnow style, but it's in fact a little bit different. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to show you a couple of things that will be typical of steps that are used in some of the other flies we're going to do today. The first of which is fastening this lead eye. In this case, this is a medium-sized lead eye. This, in fact, is chrome-plated brass, and it's preferable to most of the other colors that were tried, that were experimented with on the albacore. Okay, I usually place the eye diagonally across the hook, and I use a spacing of at least one length of the hook eye back, so this would probably be about a length and a half. And we're using 6 relatively tight wraps that way. Straighten the eye and do 6 the other way. All right, and that usually sets it pretty good. If it's not exactly perpendicular, you can take a couple of wraps one way or the other, which will help to hold that in position. The next step is to just go over the top of the lead eye under the hook, the top of the lead eye under the hook, and this is repeated 6 times. All right, and then this is an addition by Mr. Cray, which helps to bind the string together, the thread together, and we're going above the hook shank and under the lead eye, and there about 6 times. That just binds everything together. And I end up with my thread between the hook eye and the lead eye, and a little bit of lacquer would be good right about now. It never hurts. 1 or 2 X's to embed the thread in the lacquer. This particular fly uses chenille for a body. Okay, in the case of chenille, I strip off a small amount, about 1/8 of an inch of the fuzz from the 2 fibers, the 2 threads. That's tied on in front of the eyes. At this point, I'm going to make 2 wraps in front of the eye, and 2 wraps from my front right to rear left through the eye, come under and make 1 wrap from front left to rear right. And I'm just going to wrap down the length of the hook. On this particular fly, the body material is taken into the bend of the hook to create a little bit of a sweep, which would indicate the belly of this bait fish. I'm going to bring it back, making sure that you have at least 1 good tight wrap up against the back of the eyes. And at this time, you'd make your second loop over the eyes, which makes everything equal, bringing the chenille underneath and tying off. 2 or 3 wraps. Okay, this particular fly will be fished inverted. On this particular pattern, I'm going to invert the hook. Even though I'm using a rotary vise, which I could turn, I want to invert it in that most of my materials are going to be used, they're going to be gauged by a point on my vise for length. And I'd like that vise to be upright in the traditional position. Okay, I'm going to take a few more wraps with this thread, binding down that chenille and giving it a touch of lacquer. Okay, All right, there's 3 steps to the wing. The first being a polar bear colored ultra hair in a relatively small amount, being about 1/8 of an inch thick. This is usually about the length of my middle finger on a 1/0 hook. And whenever I'm placing a wing or any material, I usually gauge it, change my fingers, keeping it in that same place, and I can bind down at that point, making sure my hair is nice and straight, and clip the butt ends. Okay, touch of lacquer. Okay, the second step on the wing uses a lime-colored ultra hair. And by the way, quite often when I'm using the ultra hair, the natural ends are staggered already, and if I'm taking a short length or half the length of that entire hank of ultra hair, I'll cut this at an angle so that when I pick up that other short piece, I've already got a staggered end, and I don't have to do that by hand. Okay, we're going to put this on in the same fashion, using that joint again as the finished length of the fly. Switch hands and tie that directly on top of the other material. It's not going on too good. Okay. Again, clipping the butt ends. A little bit of lacquer. Okay, and the third step in this wing is gold crystal flash. And in doing this in one step, I'll capture the crystal flash at the rear of the thread, fasten it just behind the eye of the hook, and separate the material so as to tie it in equal amounts on either side of the eye, and that will leave it on either side of the hook, creating a lateral line, or the illusion of one. Okay. I'll tie off with my white tying thread and whip finish, and lacquer well. This lacquer will bleed through and allow that gold to be exposed on the top and both sides of the eye of the hook. Okay, this is the Rabbit Habit. The Rabbit Habit was developed by Don Brown, who was a long-time, well-respected saltwater fly tyer. It was designed for striped bass. And it's a very, very simple fly to tie. It can be tied on the boat while you're fishing if you run out. And we're locking in our white 6/0 thread behind the eye of the hook. And we're going to coat the shank with thread all the way back to a point above the barb of the hook. And lacquer lightly. The tail is a piece of rabbit strip. We're going to lose some of this fur right above the hide so as to tie this in directly above that barb and directly on top of the hook. Lace it down tightly. Drop a lacquer. And we're going to bring this one back to the point of this vise, which is right above the post. Okay, I'm going to lose this right at about the point above the post of the vise. That's the length of my tail. The body of this fly is 1 or 2 grizzly saddle hackles tied in a manner that will palmer the bobules towards the rear of the fly. So I'm going to tie this in at the tip section, right above that tail material, bind it down. And palmer it forward rather closely, brushing it back. And in doing this, I'm going to end up with the fluff from the butt section of this feather at the head, and I want a little bit of that exposed. There we go. To leave some of those nice soft fibers. And that is simply bound down and tied off and whip finished, and that's the complete fly. That's your rabbit habit. The whitewater witch was developed for fishing along our ocean drive. This is oceanfront being fished from the rocks. The reason for the nylon was that it would help this fly to sink. They were tied to cast very distinct silhouettes and were fished in a manner which carried them along with the currents. This fly would be cast parallel to the shore into a receding wave. The wave, in fact, would carry the fly out in a natural manner, which would depict a small baitfish that has just been cracked against the rocks and is kind of a little bit disabled and is being washed by the current. Bass seem to station themselves off these rocks and will pick up a fly like this, thinking it's a baitfish, and it's a very effective way to fish this type of water. Okay, we're tying a whitewater witch. Bringing this down to a point right above the point of the hook. The first step in tying this fly is to throw on a tail, and in this case I'm going to use black fish hair, and in the amount of about the size of a wooden match. This is tied on just behind the eye of the hook and wrapped down to a point just in front of the barb of the hook. The length of this fly is about 5 inches, and I'm going to trim this material at another point on my vise, which will be above the post, and it's trimmed at an angle which creates a staggered end on all the fibers. I'm going to bring my thread forward at this point to apply the body. The body is a silver material. This, in fact, is a braided mylar. I try to embed this body material into a good coat of lacquer, which I've applied to the body. This just makes for a more durable fly. This is a flat, reinforced mylar, which in fact I market as Bill's Body Braid. And we're just going to wrap this forward to a point about 1/4 of an inch behind the eye of the hook. And tie it off. Eye of the hook. There's a throat on this fly which is either red nylon or red bucktail. We'll use bucktail in this case. And it's a substantial amount of bucktail extending just about to the point of the hook. lacquer. The wing of this fly could be either the nylon or bucktail. I prefer to use bucktail in that it's a little more buoyant than the nylon, and it's going to help to hold that fly in a traditional position with the point down. The wing is usually tied to just beyond the bend of the hook. Drop of lacquer and a whip finish, and your whitewater witch is complete. This is our version of Lutebri's sea rat. This is a fly that incorporates lead eyes, which gives this fly a vertical drop, which seems to be so effective on stripers in this area. Okay, I've selected 4 saddle for this sea rat. These are olive saddle, and I've selected 2 for each side. And I'm laying these across my knee in such a way that I can add a short grizzly saddle to each one. Okay. All right. Pick up 1 half. I'm going to marry the 2 halves together so that they're of equal length. Okay, and trim them. Getting rid of the fuzz to my tie-in point. And I've applied my thread, and we're going to tie right to a point above the point of the hook. Okay, now we're going to swing to the saddle, and I'm going to pull the feathers up and actually pull them down with a tying thread, which seats them on top of the hook. I'm going to add a spot of lacquer. Okay, I'm going to add the tip of 1 marabou feather to the top of this, about 1 inch long. And lacquer. Bring my thread forward and mount a medium-sized lead eye. Okay, I've just returned my thread back to the tail section, and we're going to add our body hair. Okay, this first clump of body hair is going to incorporate the natural tips. So I'm going to cut this in as close to the hide as I can. Flick out all that underfur and the short strands of hair. I'm going to tie this in such a way that about 3/4 of this material is towards the end of the hook or the back of the hook. We're taking the 2 loose wraps, pressing down with the thumb to spread, putting my tight wraps on. That hair is in fact stacked over the tail material. A couple of wraps in front. Another bunch of deer hair. This time cutting off the tips. This hair will be held diagonally across the shank. 2 light wraps. When I apply tension, I'll pull them clockwise and let them spin. I'm going to pull the barbules back. Get a couple of tight wraps in front. And repeat that with 1 more clump behind the eye. We're going to stack in front of the eyes. Push back. And we're going to have 1 more stack. We're going to have 1 more bunch towards the eye of the hook. That'll finish. Okay, we're going to tie off. And whip finish. Shot of lacquer. Okay, using the eye as a guide, I'm going to start trimming from that eye around to the bottom. All the way over to the other eye. And then the top. Okay, we're going to leave some of those natural points, natural hair tips towards the rear of the fly. Are you able to pick this up? Okay, a couple more shots of lacquer. Okay. And that's your sea rat. Okay, your next fly is a lefty deceiver, which is probably the most popular fly being used in saltwater today. It can be tied in any combination of colors to imitate just about any bait fish. It can also be tied as an attractor pattern using a combination of colors that don't imitate much of anything and still be effective. This fly is effective in all chartreuse, all white, all black. It is more a theory or a concept in tying than a particular pattern. It's that versatile. I'm going to tie a lefty deceiver with white saddle in the tail and a chartreuse wing. This lefty deceiver is probably one of the most popular saltwater streamers in use today, and most fishermen use it with confidence all along both coasts. Okay, we're going to tie a lefty deceiver on a 2/0 Mustad 34007. Start by applying thread and wrapping it all the way down the shank of the hook to a point above the eye. And I'm going to apply my 3 pair of white saddle at a point where the ends will extend to the post of my vise. These will be tied in on top of the shank, held up in the back and actually tied down with a thread. That leaves them setting in an upright position. All right, I'm going to lacquer those butts. Bring my thread forward and attach a piece of I'm going to attach a piece of body braid, pearlescent. And we're going to wrap that forward into a good bed of lacquer. To a point about 1/4 of an inch behind the hook eye and tie off. I'm going to invert this hook. I'm going to tie in a throat of bucktail that will extend about at least a hook shank beyond the point of the hook. Now we'll gauge this for a tie-in point. Split the point of my hook. Capture my material and bring it forward. Pinch it down a little bit so it surrounds the bottom half of the hook. Bring my fly around. The wing of this pattern is again white bucktail. I'm going to tie this in a little bit longer in that it should extend about 3/4 of the length of the tail material. Okay, and I'm going to gauge that. And tie it in. Behind the eye.